people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
News. Okay, we'll start with this. Sort of a before and after, if you will. In reference to this past weekend's fight, veteran boxing scribe Keith Idec wrote, Jaron Boots Ennis deserves blame for embracing embarrassing Karen Chukhadzhian rematch.
So what did he want him to do, not fight at all?
Jaron Ennis entered a Boys and Girls Club in his hometown of Philly on Wednesday night to visit impressionable children looking to be inspired by the unbeaten IBF welterweight champion. Those kids could learn a lot from how the understated, respectful Ennis goes about his business, a humble, hardworking grinder from a boxing family. The talented Ennis has patiently plodded through promotional and platform issues and descended slowly but surely to the cusp of cracking the top 10 of pound-for-pound lists.
Huh?
Who did Jaron Ennis fight? Who did Jaron Ennis beat that he's on the cusp of being rated on the pound-for-pound list? You just called the Karen Chukhadzhian rematch embarrassing.
So that gets you on a pound-for-pound list.
I want all of you to pay attention to Keith Idec's perspective in this article. Ennis, who answers to the nickname Boots, is unlike most of his contemporaries. The explosive offensive fighter prefers to let his considerable abilities talk for him rather than taking to social media to call out potential opponents he knows won't accept his challenges. 3 nights after lending his time to his charitable cause, however, Ennis is figuratively requesting charitable donations from knowledgeable Philly fight fans who know mismatches when they're pitched to them.
Remember, this is from before this weekend's fight.
The IBF is mostly to blame for ordering its 147-pound champion to partake in an utterly unnecessary mandated rematch against Ukraine's Karen Chukhadzhian on Saturday night at the Wells Fargo Center. Ennis still shouldn't be absolved from blame for embracing what figures to be another relatively easy encounter with Chukhadzhian, who lost every round on all 3 scorecards when he first faced Ennis in January of last year.
Now remember what he said. He called it a mismatch before the fight, but now that you've seen the fight, was that a mismatch?
Ennis won the then vacant IBF interim welterweight title the night he shut out Chukhadzhian on the Gervonta Davis versus Hector Luis Garcia undercard. He was elevated to permanent champion when Terrence Crawford moved up the junior middle following his 9th round knockout of Errol Spence Jr. in what was their long-awaited title unification fight 15 months ago in Vegas.
Boots has come a long way from fighting on undercards. He's headlining his own shows now in his own town.
But Keith Idec doesn't see the value in that. He wants to fight Crawford to prove he is boxing's best welterweight. Crawford, 37, has publicly acknowledged that he wants to face higher reward opponents than Ennis, namely undisputed super middleweight champion Canelo Alvarez. Ennis's issue, as it relates to fighting Chukhadzhian again, is that he still wants to become boxing's fully unified welterweight champion. I want to be undisputed, Ennis told Uncrowned. It's very important. I want to be undisputed in multiple weight classes, so I gotta start at 47. It's gotta be 47, 54, 60, and 68. I'm trying to be undisputed in all 4 weight divisions, so it's very important to my legacy. The 27-year-old Ennis needs to beat the November 15th winner between WBC champion Mario Barrios versus Abel Ramos, plus WBO champion Brian Norman and WBA champion Eman Stanionis to accomplish this goal. In this diminished division, though, matching Crawford's feat won't enhance Ennis's legacy the way it did for Crawford, one of the sport's pound-for-pound kings.
According to Keith Idec, it's not worth Jaron Ennis becoming undisputed at welterweight. That's according to him.
Crawford, a 3-weight world champion from Omaha, Nebraska, dropped the previously unbeaten Spence 3 times on his way to adding the IBF WBA and WBC crowns to his WBO belt. Beating Barrios, Ramos, Norman, and Stanionis would take Ennis another year or more to accomplish if he were to win those bouts. Taking that path would essentially waste another 12 to 18 months of Ennis's physical prime, some of which has already been squandered while Ennis fought mostly ordinary opposition on Showtime, while his late promoter, Cameron Duncan, understandably protected his investment. As Ennis appeared on cards arranged by Al Heyman's PBC, Ennis signed with Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing in May once he and his father, manager Derek Boziennis, couldn't come to an agreement to stay aligned with PBC and its new content partner, Amazon Prime Video. Hearn wisely brought Ennis to Philly for his Matchroom debut. The card drew a paid crowd of 14,119 people to the Wells Fargo Center, home of the NBA Sixers and the NHL's Flyers, and generated nearly $1.2 million in ticket revenue. There hadn't been a crowd that large for boxing indoors in Philly since late middleweight great Marvin Hagler defeated Philadelphia's Benny Briscoe by UD at the since demolished Spectrum in August of 1978. They tried to return almost 4 months later with a title unification fight against Brian Norman, a hard-hitting, fan-friendly, unbeaten fighter from Conyers, Georgia, just outside Atlanta. But negotiations fell apart over approximately $250,000, which left Ennis to either handle his mandatory obligation with Chukhadzhian or vacate his title to move up to junior middle.
He's being generous.
That the unification fell apart over 200 large? No, it fell apart because Brian Norman ducked. Ennis gave it some thought, but he ultimately determined he should remain at welterweight for a fight no one outside of Chukhadzhian's family and team could conceivably think is a constructive use of anyone's time. The IBF inexplicably ordered Ennis versus Chukhadzhian too, because Chukhadzhian defeated another undeserving contender in Italy's Pietro Rossetti in an ill-conceived October 2023 elimination match less than 10 months after Chukhadzhian was completely outclassed by Ennis.
Well, what would you have them do, Keith? Never give Karen Chukhadzhian a title shot again because he already got one? Is that how it should work to you?
Ennis, nonetheless, could have taken a stand against strange sanctioning mandates and better serviced his fan base and strengthened his reputation more than wins over Norman, Stanionis, and Barrios or Ramos might do, though it is audacious to tell a fighter who has worked hard and taken physical risks his whole life to give up a title he cherishes. It is time Ennis starts attempting to realize his vast potential.
I don't understand what Keith Idec wanted.
He's poo-pooing on the Chukhadzhian rematch. He says Ennis shouldn't have had it, but if he would have moved up to junior middle instead of fighting him, who was he gonna fight up there?
Terrence Crawford already told him he's got bigger fish to fry.
Sebastian Fundora's all tied up with a Spence fight. Bakrub Murtazaliev just fought. Who was Boots supposed to fight if he decided to skip out on Karen and move up straight away?
What does Keith think? They were going to make the Virgil Ortiz fight on that kind of notice? In a jiffy? I don't think so.
Moving up to 154 pounds rather than dominating the overmatched Chukhadzhian again would have enabled him to start that arduous process. Ennis admitted the most appealing options to him to compete within the junior middleweight division are most notably Crawford. If Crawford were to change his mind, rival Virgil Ortiz, the winner between Fundora and Spence, Jermel Charlo, and the winner of Sergey Bohachuk versus Israel Madrimov, December 21st in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Keith, everybody you just mentioned is not available.
Was not available. So your recommendation is that he shouldn't have fought Karen to move up and fight guys that weren't available.
Okay.
I ain't gonna lie, 154 is poppin', Ennis said. Everybody's at 154 right now. Every fight at 154 is eye-catching to me. Everybody at 154 can fight. I feel like whoever I fight at 154, it's gonna be a great name regardless. Like I said, 154 is poppin' right now. So like I said, I would love to come to 154, but let me handle business at 147 and I'll be there soon. Except that Ennis won't be there soon. Not if fully unifying the sport's 4 recognized welterweight titles remains his mission next year and perhaps beyond. Hearn intends to revisit negotiations with Norman's team, assuming Ennis defeats Chukhadzhian with expected ease this Saturday, which it wasn't easy. It wasn't in any way, shape, or form what Keith thought it would be.
Turned out to be a good fight.
Shay Segev, DAZN's chief executive officer, should explain why the streaming service decided to pay Ennis a purse in excess of $2 million for a complete mismatch he could have simply informed Hearn his company wouldn't finance. DAZN subscribers deserve better main events than Ennis Chukhadzhian 2 for a $225 annual subscription cost in the United States, particularly after charging those US subscribers an additional $19.99 to view the British-centric Artur Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol undercard last month from Riyadh.
You didn't like it?
Hearn realizes he has been tasked with selling something the boxing public doesn't want. He called the event a nightmare financially because Matchroom stacked the undercard with unbeaten WBC Super Flyweight champion Bam Rodriguez, former WBA featherweight champion Raymond Ford, light heavyweight contender Khalil Cole, and rising junior welterweight prospect Ernesto Tito Mercado to account for an unremarkable main event. It was a really difficult decision, Hearn told Uncrowned. Ennis was really good about it. He was like, look, I know this is not really a fight that I want. And I'm like, well, maybe it's time to move up to 154. He said, yeah, whatever you think is the best, strategy-wise, I'm up for. But my dream has always been to unify. I want to win the belt, so I was like, damn. We started to look at 154, and we looked at the likes of Bohachuk, who you know, maybe even Madrimov, maybe even Virgil Ortiz. But I said to Boots, and I said to Bozy, be honest with me. Are you tight at 147? And they're like, not in the slightest. I always feel that you should move up when you can't make the weight anymore to perform at the highest level. Matchroom never made an offer to a junior middleweight opponent because Ennis's preference, temporarily at least, is to collect 147-pound titles. The crowd could still exceed 10,000 on Saturday night. An impressive number considering the nauseating nature of the main event. Hearn also assured disappointed Ennis fans that they intend to return to Wells Fargo in February or March with a title unification fight against one of the aforementioned champions. Stanionis likely must make his own mandated title defense against another unbeaten up-and-comer.
Gaisov.
Norman, meanwhile, might prefer to reschedule his optional title defense against Puerto Rico's Derek Cuevas now that the bruising to his right hand has subsided. Norman was supposed to face Cuevas on Keyshawn Davis versus Gustavo Lemos undercard Friday night at Scope Arena in Norfolk, Virginia, but he withdrew from what was supposed to be his first title defense in September. That could leave Barrios or Ramos, who will meet on the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson undercard, as Ennis' only option among the other welterweight champions. Depending on how that fight unfolds, Barrios or Ramos might consider February or March too quick of a turnaround to battle the exceptional Ennis. If Ennis is therefore left to pursue a voluntary defense of his IBF title rather than landing a championship unification fight, it'll reinforce what is obvious, that he never should have embraced this embarrassing rematch with Chukhadzhian.
Okay, so now understand that everything Keith Idec said in that article was from before Saturday's fight, but having seen it, it turned out to be a better, more entertaining fight than expected.
Way better than the first one.
Keith Idec didn't want Boots to have that fight, but the alternatives that he offered up didn't make sense. All he offered up were fights that were not going to happen this year. Who are you talking about? Terrence Crawford, Virgil Ortiz.
None of those fights were going to happen before the end of this year.
Jermel Charlo.
Jermel isn't even back yet, and when he comes back, who knows if he's going to come back to junior middle. The winner of Fundora versus Spence, bear in mind, they haven't even fought yet, so how is he supposed to fight the winner?
Your point.
You poo-pooed on a fight that turned out to be better than what you thought, and every alternative you offered up, every substitute, was a guy that's not available. So in essence, you're just complaining to complain.
Frankly, you're complaining about the wrong thing, because if you're going to complain about anything, you should complain that the other champions at the weight were already approached for a unification match with Boots, and they didn't take it. That's what led us here. That's what led back to a Karen Chukhadzhian fight, that they didn't take the fight with Boots. If they would have, we wouldn't have had to endure the rematch, which wasn't even bad, by the way. Pretty good card all the way through.
Overall, it was a fun night, but if Keith Idec doesn't highlight that as the catalyst, it's because of what I told you. It's because he doesn't see the value in Boots shooting for Undisputed anyway. He doesn't care about that.
You heard what his perspectives were before the fight. here's what his perspectives are afterwards.
More than a little perplexed that some seem to think it matters more for Boots' legacy to beat 3 welterweight champions who were elevated from interim status or whatever the WBA did, rather than fight Ortiz, the type of opponent, and vulnerable, by the way, he always said he wants to fight.
The short version. Keith wants the Ortiz fight more than an undisputed run.
Keith likes the Ortiz fight more than an undisputed run. Now me, I'm okay with either. If Boots decides to stay at 147, he might actually get some of those unification matches next year. If he decides to stay there. If he doesn't, and he fights Virgil straight away, I'm okay with that too. The disconnect is that Virgil is not a legacy fight.
Get it straight.
Fighting Virgil Ortiz might be a more popular fight with more profile, and it might be for more money, but there isn't more legacy in it. Virgil Ortiz has never been a champion at 147. He's not a full champion now at 154. The only real appeal of fighting Virgil is it gets you more money, but it's not bigger or better for your legacy.
It's not?
Undisputed pertains to legacy, as very few professional boxers ever achieved that. Now maybe Keith is spoiled because he saw Josh Taylor do it, and Terrence do it, and Usyk do it, and Katie Taylor, and Clarissa.
Chantel Cameron. No, yeah, you know it.
He's spoiled, so he doesn't really care about that. Maybe he just doesn't like the guys at 147. He feels the real challenges are at 154. But it's hard for me to look at a Virgil Ortiz fight as a legacy fight when Virgil ain't got no legacy.
Think about it. It's not like Virgil Ortiz is the number 1 or the number 2, number 3, number 4 junior middleweight. He isn't.
He's only fought one legitimate junior middleweight, Sergey Bohachuk, who I don't even think he beat legitimately.
I think he got a home-cooked decision.
That doesn't mean a fight with him and Boots is a bad fight. No, it's not a bad fight. It's a great fight. And if they made it, I'd watch it. But it's not so great that you can just poo-poo all over Undisputed. Undisputed is for Boots' legacy. Virgil is for Boots' bank account.
That's the difference.
So what if Boots skips out on Undisputed, moves up to junior middle, fights Virgil, beats him, and then afterwards Virgil don't go on to do much? Virgil don't do nothing that gets him remembered.
Huh?
Doesn't seem like much of a legacy fight in that scenario, does it? That if Boots were to fight him, and Boots were to beat him, and Virgil doesn't amount to much afterwards, well, that certainly doesn't add that much to Boots' legacy.
Not like Undisputed would.
There are many champions in the sport of boxing, spread across many, many divisions, but very few of them achieve that.
Now, Keith Idec doesn't think much of the guys that are there, the guys with belts, but then again, Keith Idec didn't think much of Karen Chukhadzhian before the fight.
He called it a mismatch, but you saw how it played out. Was that a mismatch?
No.
Was it easy?
No.
The point I'm making, you're giving Virgil Ortiz far too much credit and not enough to Undisputed as an endeavor, as a legacy. I'm equally all right with both. If he decides to stay at 147, if he can stay there and pursue Undisputed, that's all right. But if he moves up and fights Virgil, that's all right too.
Just don't make it seem like one is so much more important than the other. That's just you. That's just you being selfish.
Like when you complain about the Chukhadzhian rematch, but you don't offer up a viable alternative, a substitute. Everybody you named, none of that was going to happen this year.
So what are you saying, that he shouldn't have fought at all? What good would that have done?
Inactivity.
It's gotta be it, because none of that shit you said was gonna happen before the end of this year.
You're complaining about the wrong thing, Keith, because you're selfish.